To Santiago, 562. Submachine guns and ammo being sent by courier. Leaving Washington 0700 hours, 19th of October. Arrival Santiago, late evening, 20th of October. The detailed plans of a political assassination. In the crosshairs of the conspirators, General Rene Schneider, Chief of Staff of the Chilean Armed Forces, who has made powerful enemies in Washington. The weapons arrive in the diplomatic bag.
Hay antecedentes, ¿no?, de cual las grandes autoridades norteamericanas en ese momento veían a mi padre como el obstáculo. Este obstáculo que había que sacarse de en medio. O sea, este era una especie de insecto que estaba ahí, que estaba molestando, ¿te fijas? Y ese insecto era mi padre, ¿no?
General Schneider gave his backing to the Chilean election results of September 1970, which were won by the left-wing candidate Salvador Allende. The general announced publicly that the army would respect the outcome of the election. As Allende only gained a simple majority of 36.2% of the vote, Congress was required to endorse his election victory.
The election in Chile has been won, but the president has not been confirmed, the new president, Salvador Allende. Chile has, like the United States, a transition period of about 60 days. Before the president can even accept the oath of office, Henry Kissinger suborns the murder of the military officer, the senior military officer, General Rene Schneider, head of the Chilean General Staff, who in his person, as an individual, is thought of as the principal obstacle to a military coup, because he believes the Chilean armed forces take their oath only to the Constitution. It's therefore decided Schneider must go.
The U.S. administration regarded Allende's victory as a geostrategic maneuver by the Soviet Union. As recently released CIA files now prove, President Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger planned a military coup to prevent Allende from taking office. Kissinger coordinated the covert operation, of which not even the U.S. ambassador in Chile was informed.
If any adventure were undertaken, it would boomerang against the United States and personally against the president, worse than the Bay of Pigs. That was the cable that got me a summons home right away because they thought I had stumbled on their plot.
So you knew that they planned some adventure?
I smelled it as a newspaperman.
Nixon and Kissinger instructed the CIA to have General Schneider kidnapped in a bid to trigger a military coup. The reluctant ambassador was summoned home to report to the president.
He then launched into a denunciation of Allende. He kept hitting his hand like that. He was going to smash Allende economically, going to cut off his water, etc. An American expression, not literal cut off.
But what did he say about Allende? Did he qualify?
He just kept referring to him as that bastard, that SOB. He was going to smash him. Didn't get into anything substantive. When he got all through, my opening line was, you have, as you know, Mr. President, and as you have complimented me in the past, I always speak my mind, and I hope you won't take it amiss. I hope you won't take it amiss if I tell you you are dead wrong. Well, I thought Kissinger would fall off the chair. His eyes bulged, I think, a foot. He looked at me as if I had lost my mind.
How comes that a brilliant person like Kissinger discusses kidnapping plans?
How?
Yeah, how come, how can you explain it?
I can explain it only by going back to what I said about Machiavelli, that that success comes from flattering, adulating, and serving the powerful. And Kissinger is a man who luxuriates, literally, in dealing with the powerful to this day.
In the old executive building, Henry Kissinger convened with CIA Director Richard Helms and his Chief of Operations, Kara Messinas, to discuss details of this top-secret operation, codenamed Track 2. Also present was Kissinger's military advisor, General Alexander Haig.
We were in a Cold War. It was a question of who was going to survive, Marxist-Leninists or free world, market economies, democracies. In Chile, with the facts that it was being communized by Allende, that the women of Chile, unable to get the Chilean military because of their long heritage of non-intervention, to take action, went to the streets of Santiago and other cities. You remember they called it the Pots and Pans Brigade. Yeah. It is all forgotten today. I never hear a word written about it.
Behind Ambassador Corey's back, the CIA station in Santiago received the following orders via telex. It is firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup, utilizing every appropriate resource. It is imperative that these actions be implemented clandestinely and securely, so that the U.S. government and the American hand will be hidden. The U.S. administration funded the operation to the tune of $250,000 US, which was used to recruit members of the Chilean armed forces to liquidate their commander. Contact to the hit squad was established via mutual acquaintances amongst Chile's equestrian community.
I mean, they had no one that had as close a connection with the Chilean army at that time, outsider, except me. Because one, we never went to any American functions. We went to all Chilean functions. My wife played bridge with many of the wives and did things with them. I rode on their team as a rider.
Kissinger and Haig and Helms were discussing the idea with the kidnapping. But what was the purpose? What did they expect from a kidnapping?
Well, they'd have to bring General Prats, who was the number 2 man in the Army, in to become commander of the Army, because he was for us.
Was Prats for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you speak with him?
Yeah.
What did he say? What did you ask him and what did he answer?
He just smiled and said, well, if something happened to the present commander of the Army, I would then become the president of the military.
And then do a coup?
Yeah.
At this stage, General Rene Schneider was still unaware that a group of his own soldiers had been hired to assassinate him. The traitors received their blood money from Kissinger's courier, Colonel Weimert.
The story was I had this money and I couldn't put it in my office safe. So I stuck it. It was done in long rubber bands, $250,000. And I put it in my riding boots, and no one else moved the boots but me.
General Camilo Valenzuela, the local commander of Santiago. Weimart supplied him with arms, hand grenades, and $50,000 in cash. The extreme right-wing General Roberto Viol also received $50,000 and a life assurance policy worth over $250,000. Subsequently, Henry Kissinger was to testify before the Senate committee hearing that he gave the order on October 15, 1970, to abort the assassination attempt. But the telex sent from CIA headquarters to the Santiago station a day later proves the opposite. A Vio coup attempt carried out by him alone, with the forces now at his disposal, would fail. Encourage him to amplify his planning. Encourage him to join forces with other coup planners so that they may act in concert.
The issue is whether Kissinger, as he claims, turned off Track 2 on October 15th, 1970, when he met with the CIA, and the CIA informed him that the leading coup plotter at that moment, Roberto Vio, might move precipitously and that he might fail in his coup effort, and that would have grave implications for future coups as well as for the United States. And Kissinger at that point said, well, we should tell Vio to hold off, at least temporarily. Tell him to preserve his assets and to work with others, and we'll get back to him. The documents about that meeting are absolutely clear. We have them here. Kissinger instructed the CIA representative, Mr. Karamessinas, to preserve agency assets in Chile, working clandestinely and securely to maintain the capability for agency operations against Allende in the future. This is the most important. The meeting concluded, and I quote, on Dr. Kissinger's note that the agency should continue keeping the pressure on every Allende weak spot in sight, now, after the 24th of October, after the 5th of November, and into the future until such time as new marching orders are given. Mr. Karamessinas, the CIA representative, stated that the agency would comply. The document is clear. Kissinger did not turn off coup plotting. He reaffirmed the marching orders that coup plotting should continue. And in the CIA's cable from Langley headquarters to the Santiago station the next day, it is absolutely clear. Track 2 policy objectives and actions were reviewed at high U.S. government level. That's a reference to the meeting with Henry Kissinger. It is firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup.
Mi padre salió de aquí tipo 8 de la mañana en un auto que iba solamente con su chofer. Iban llegando a la esquina de Martínez Zamora con Américo Vespucio, y el auto ahí fue rodeado por otros y se le impidió el paso. En ese momento, al estar detenido el auto, vino una persona que era un señor de apellido Mengoza, que estaba esperando el auto en la esquina, él estaba a pie, y lo encañona a mi papá. Mi papá en ese momento saca una pistola que llevaba y el tipo le dispara una mano. Mi papá, que parece que también alcanza a disparar ahí. De un jeep que queda al otro costado sale gente, rompen el vidrio con un mazo y disparan hacia adentro.
Not assassination and not murder. The hearing was very clear about that. It was accidental in terms of the United States.
But kidnapping is not a crime.
Well, kidnapping is it depends on what your objectives are. I'm not going to justify it. They were not my policy.
No sé exactamente qué orden tenían, ¿te fijas? Porque aquí no hay claramente un intento de secuestrar en ningún momento. Nadie le dice, señor, baje del auto que lo vamos a secuestrar. Sino que hay automáticamente, al escuchar los disparos, los tipos disparan y punto. Y después se van.
The assassination of General Schneider ended in a fiasco for Kissinger. Allende emerged from the crisis in a stronger position. The army backed his election victory, as did the opposition Christian Democratic Party.
Did you go to Schneider's funeral?
Oh, yeah. Yep. In fact, as we know, one of my horses was used in a parade for the funeral.
Kissinger said to the Senate committee, there was no plot I am familiar with. I never ordered it. I was not involved.
He's a liar.
After successful execution of the operation, the U.S. government paid the hit squad hush money. In an effort to keep the prior contact secret, maintain the goodwill of the group, and for humanitarian reasons, $35,000 was passed.
Yo pienso que Henry Kissinger era el jefe. Él era el jefe de esto, ¿no? Y hoy día hay antecedentes muy claros de su participación, de opiniones de él y de que él impulsó esto.
Su familia va a acusar a Kissinger y otros.
Nuestra familia está pensando qué hacer frente a eso.
The 11th of September, 1973. Salvador Allende died in the burning presidential palace, Moneda. The generals mounted their coup at the behest of conservative politicians and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, who were keen to see the army restore law and order on the streets. But the leader of the junta, Augusto Pinochet, had far grander plans, a self-styled, ruthless military dictatorship.
That's like having ants in your cellar. You got to kill them, get rid of them. And he had a lot of bad people there at that time. I mean, he did, if I'd have been in his place, I'd have done the same thing. He had to clean it out. And a lot of people got killed. But a lot of people who got killed, I felt, deserved being killed.
Hundreds of suspects were executed, thousands more tortured, and incarcerated in concentration camps. 1,500 people disappeared without trace. Within a few weeks, Chile's parliamentary democracy was destroyed. Yet, Henry Kissinger remained silent.
Kissinger had many intelligence reports on the atrocities taking place under Augusto Pinochet. Atrocities that reached their peak in 1975 and 1976. And yet, in June of 1976, Kissinger traveled to Chile to give a speech, ironically, on human rights at the Organization of American States meeting that was being held in Santiago. And he did a curious thing. He quietly met with Augusto Pinochet before he gave this speech. In his memoirs, he portrays this meeting as going to tell Pinochet that you have to do something about your human rights record. But the actual transcript of the meeting, which was declassified not so long ago, makes it clear that his memoirs totally misrepresent what actually happened and his own goal in meeting with General Pinochet. What he really told Pinochet is, look, I have to give this speech about human rights violations in Chile because the U.S. Congress needs to be mollified. I need to please them, otherwise they're going to cut off economic and military aid to Chile, and that won't be in your interest or in my interest. I want you to know, he told Pinochet, that in the West we are grateful that you overthrew Allende. We believe you did a great service to the West.
Here, at the site of the former Pisagua concentration camp, bodies of regime opponents were excavated. Augusto Pinochet is still commander of armed forces, a powerful man who continues to enjoy immunity for his crimes.
General, general, ¿podría usted seguir insistiendo en que en Chile no hubo detenidos desaparecidos después de encontrar estos cadáveres?
Yo nunca, señorita, le vuelvo a decir, hubo una guerra irregular que fue muy bien planeada por la KGB.
¿Pero qué le parece que se hayan encontrado en una sola tumba 2 cadáveres enterrados?
Pero es que economía más grande.
I would never today support the persecution of President Pinochet, who I believe was a hero, who saved this country.
In June 2001, Henry Kissinger unveiled his new book, Does America Need a Foreign Policy? A world-renowned politician continues to shroud in silence the darker chapters of his biography. He refused to grant us an interview, arguing that he did not want to confirm conclusions which have no basis in fact. What drove this once liberal and brilliant Harvard professor to back one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century? After all, Henry Kissinger is himself survivor of a dictatorship. Born of Jewish parentage in the Bavarian town of Fürth in 1923, Heinz Alfred Kissinger was aged just 15 when in 1938 his family fled from Hitler's fascism and emigrated to the United States.
Es waren schwierige Zeiten, es war kein Vergnügen. Aber es hat mir auch gezeigt, wie wichtig die Freiheit ist. Und es war für mich in Amerika sehr beeinflussend, denn wenn meine linksgerichteten Kollegen in Harvard tobten über den Faschismus in Amerika, konnte ich innerlich nur lachen. Ich lebte unter dem Faschismus.
Kissinger's liberal friends and his students at Harvard University were surprised when in 1968 their mentor entered the service of Richard Nixon, the bête noire of the liberal establishment. Kissinger was eager to take up a new challenge. The Vietnam War provided him with the ideal opportunity. During Vietnam's Tet celebrations to mark the beginning of the Lunar New Year in 1968, a Viet Cong commando unit stormed the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The attack was repelled, but the images portrayed of an impotent superpower endured. The U.S. establishment finally accepted that the war could not be won. Acting on the conclusions of a CIA analysis revealing that 80% of the rural population of South Vietnam supported the National Liberation Front, the Viet Cong, President Johnson announced a halt to the bombing shortly before the presidential elections in 1968. The peace negotiations in Paris were on the brink of a dramatic breakthrough.
Tonight, I have ordered our aircraft and our naval vessels to make no attacks on North Vietnam.
Prospects of peace boosted Vice President Hubert Humphrey's standings in the polls, causing panic in the camp of his Republican opponent, Richard Nixon. Nixon arranged a secret meeting with the Chinese businesswoman Anna Chennault, who resided in the Watergate apartment complex. He asked her to persuade the South Vietnamese President Thu to sabotage the peace plan.
But then when Johnson announced this big announcement, it concerned them, and knowing that I travel to Asia quite frequently, and I talk to my friends in Southeast Asia very frequently, and President Thu also did not trust even his ambassador to Washington, D.C. And so he sent special representative to Washington to see me and give me messages, because he did not want to have any contact with Nixon directly. So messages from South Vietnam always gone through me, and I indirectly, and then I would give it to
But
Mitchell.
what has been the last message of Nixon, Mitchell to Tew, President Tew, after the Johnson speak?
Want to know if he still not go to Paris peace talk.
Did they urge him not to go?
No, they did not. And they did not, I mean, they didn't go that far, but they want to know what was his position. And I got back the information from President Tew that he would take the chance, he would not go to Paris peace talk until the election.
The FBI placed Anna Chennault under surveillance. A few days later, an intelligence agent reported that Anna Chennault had asked President Tew to boycott the Paris negotiations. On behalf of Richard Nixon, she told him, "Hold on, we are gonna win." In his memoirs, Nixon later confessed to having had an informant in Johnson's delegation at the Paris peace talks who was feeding him information on the president's policy. His name? Henry Kissinger.
We did know that he was getting information from both sides. He probably was giving information to both sides too. And I don't blame him. I mean, after all, he was not sure which side's going to win. Whoever wins, he's going to go to their side. That's all right with me.
Nixon's secret diplomacy proved successful. 2 days before the election, Tew boycotted the Paris negotiations. Nixon won the election by a very narrow majority, thanks to the active support of Anna Chennault and Henry Kissinger.
He did agree to use his position of trust and confidence in Paris to funnel quite important advance information, in particular on the crucial matter of the timing of the bombing halt, as it was known in the campaign, the decision to cease the bombardment of North Vietnam. In other words, Mr. Nixon always knew in advance the moves of the government he was running against. And we know further that Mr. Kissinger's opinion of Mr. Nixon was very low. He had always and repeatedly and quite indiscreetly said to people in the Rockefeller Republican camp and also to his Democratic friends like Mr. Brzezinski, Professor Huntington, that he regarded Nixon as a dangerous crook, as an unscrupulous man, as a political fanatic. And so on. Why is he suddenly doing this tremendous favor during an election campaign to someone for whom he has nothing but contempt?
Why?
It's in the hope of a political reward.
President-elect and I have had many extensive conversations over the past week about the problems and opportunities confronting the United States in the international field.
Kissinger succeeded in maneuvering himself to the very heart of power in the United States. Nixon appointed him as his security advisor, as president of the National Security Council, as director of the 40 Committee, which coordinated the covert operations of the U.S. intelligence services, and as head of the study group Vietnam, which was responsible for the daily prosecution of the war. In effect, Kissinger was operating a type of shadow U.S. government.
When I talked to Nixon, he made the commitment that if he won the presidency, he would try every way to end the war in Vietnam. And that's why I went out of my way to help him. But after the elections, he wanted to end the war with victory, which I consider was not possible. Kissinger didn't quite agree with me either, because I think he was the one who convinced Nixon that they could end the war with victory. And I didn't see how we could win the war in victory. And I saw the United States getting deeper and deeper into this Vietnam conflict.
Kissinger was striving for outright victory as the only way to ensure an honorable peace. The first 6 months of 1969 saw the introduction of a new strategy of pacification. Launched in the Quien Ho province of the Mekong Delta to purge the Delta Viet Cong, Operation Speedy Express involved the use of massive firepower. Conducted on the express orders from the highest echelons of the administration, this operation precipitated a massacre witnessed by American citizens.
In those 6 months, the Army reported killing approximately 11,000 enemy soldiers. The number was, I believe, 10,899 or something, close to 11,000. The number of weapons captured from those dead people, called enemy in the press release, was very specific. It was 748 weapons. It's suggested that most of the people killed, as it turned out, had no weapons, and in fact they were civilians. And many of the people killed, possibly 5,000, at least 5,000, were innocent civilians killed quite deliberately. I mean, the command had no, they were aware of the inevitability of putting that much firepower into densely populated areas. Relentless airstrikes, B-52 strikes, tactical airstrikes, helicopter gunships crisscrossing the area, shooting under the terms they were under. They could shoot at practically anything that moved. And we went to civilian hospitals to find out what had happened. Their records were vivid. At one civilian hospital after another, we found that the people admitted during that time were killed or wounded, died in the hospital, but had been sent there by what was known as friendly fire, which was U.S. fire. Very small percentage of hospital admissions of civilians came from Viet Cong fire. The command liked this operation so much, the results of it, that they sent people from other parts of the country down there to see what had happened so that it could be duplicated elsewhere. And the study, the managerial study, as it were, of Speedy Express involved determining, the Pentagon term was peak killing hour. That is the time when all systems were going, and it speaks for itself, peak killing hour. And that hour, this general told me, had been ascertained to be late afternoon, about 4 or so. A time that anybody in Vietnam knew that a lot of civilian traffic out there, kids coming home from school, people coming home from work. When they're right on the village, that concussion shook their babies to death. And they bled to death through their ears. So there wasn't much interest in, there was interest in gaining control of territory, and that's what happened. In fact, there were 120,000 Vietnamese went from enemy control under government control. In most cases, that meant, in the expression of the time, voting with their feet. It was a cruel description of what really happened, which meant they fled, because to stay in the countryside would mean they got killed.
I would have been far more vigorous in the conduct of that war. I would have ended it in the first 6 months of the Nixon presidency, which it could have been ended very easily. How? Not by surrender, not by overthrowing President Chiu, which was what was all the Paris peace talks were all about, and not by halting bombing for dishonest promises from an enemy that had no intention of doing anything but winning, with the support, and a very active support, of the Soviet Union. So this was the issue, of course.
But how would you have ended the war?
Well, we could have ended the war by the Christmas bombing.
After only a few weeks in office, Henry Kissinger had become the principal architect of the war and was involved in detailed decisions at the Supreme Command level. He was clearly aware of the enormous toll of casualties among the civilian population. In the spring of 1969, and against the advice of the Pentagon and the State Department, Nixon and Kissinger decided to expand the war to include neutral Cambodia. Their orders? to conduct massive airstrikes against the supply dumps in the border areas. Codenamed Menu, the operation was launched covertly. Congress was deliberately hoodwinked and fed with false information. After the first wave of strikes, named Operation Breakfast, Nixon's chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, made the following entry in his personal diary, dated March 18, 1969. Kissinger's Operation Breakfast, a great success. He came in beaming with the report, very productive. Later, Haldeman wrote that Kissinger had spoken out vehemently against Nixon's proposal to end the war in 1971 for fear of damaging their chances in the forthcoming elections. For reasons of domestic policy, the war would have to be prolonged until autumn 1972.
If you ever felt that foreign policy was being manipulated for the sake of domestic political reasons, what would you do?
I would resign. And I would say so publicly. Foreign policy has to reflect the continuing values of the American people, and it cannot be the subject of partisan policy.
Even Kissinger's closest advisors on the National Security Council criticized his aggressive war policy. The consequences? He had their conversations wiretapped by the FBI.
I was one of the people who was wiretapped while serving under him. I cannot forgive him for being a party to it or for never apologizing.
Why did he do that? Had he reasons to suspect that you gave information?
No, I mean, you look at the people who wiretapped, it had nothing to do with information. I think it was intended to prove his loyalty. Nixon is recorded on the tapes, the Nixon tapes, as saying all we got was gossip and bullshit.
But how do you explain, because you were friends with him, how can you explain such a change in his attitude and his personal development?
I think he was willing to do anything necessary to retain power.
He wiretapped aides and associates in the Pentagon. He wiretapped American journalists with whom he had supposedly friendly and close relations. This was part of this atmosphere of paranoia and almost hysteria inside the administration about leaks to the press, about what they regarded as acts of not just disloyalty, but downright treason. And Henry was very ardent in pursuing the traitors as they were seen by the inner guard, the inner circle of the Nixon White House, to establish, of course, his own bona fides, to establish his own credibility with Nixon, with Haldeman, with Ehrlichman. But the taps, in the end, were all part of this ceaseless maneuvering for power. They never yielded any important or substantive information about leaks, and everyone knew that, but they were a sign of Henry's devotion.
Vietnam veterans stage anti-war protests in front of the Capitol and demonstratively hand back their medals. The protest movement was directed primarily against the use of weapons of mass destruction, such as napalm and cluster bombs, against the civilian population, which they regarded as a war crime. And the facts bear this out. Of the 3 million Vietnamese who were killed throughout the course of the war, 2 million were civilians.
I never heard Henry Kissinger express the slightest concern for civilian casualties or for the damage done. Quite the contrary. He began in the fall of 1969 in September in a group that's been written about called the September Group to plan a savage, brutal blow against North Vietnam, which
These
later...
were his words?
These were his words. He said to us as a planning group, I can't believe that a fourth-rate power like North Vietnam does not have a breaking point.
Despite the application of the latest sophisticated technology, the war could not be won on the ground. The Viet Cong, or Charlie as they were dubbed, ruled the jungle and generally remained invisible. Their supplies came from communist North Vietnam along the hidden Ho Chi Minh Trail. In response, the United States began withdrawing its own troops and stepping up airstrikes. The liberation movement, the Viet Cong, relocated a number of its bases to neighboring Cambodia. On May 1st, 1970, both American and South Vietnamese soldiers launched their incursion into Cambodia to try and cut off the Viet Cong supply lines. The invasion plunged the country into a catastrophic civil war, which ultimately paved the way to power of the murderous Khmer Rouge regime.
I decided to resign, along with Tony Lake and with Bill Watts, our colleague on the NSC staff, because I felt that the Cambodian invasion was a betrayal of the president's pledge to seek an honorable and just peace in Vietnam. I knew that peace was within our grasp. I was intimately involved in the negotiations. I knew that the other side was ready to agree, that we were ready to agree, and that the Cambodian invasion really destroyed all of that, devastated it for years to come, and literally cost tens of thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese lives. I thought it was one of the great crimes of the century.
Those who disagreed with the wisdom of the decision, and those for whom the decision provided a catharsis, and which then led them into an attack on the whole structure of government, the credibility of the presidency, and the authority of our leadership. The former was understandable, because it was a tough problem, and the pros and cons were fairly evenly divided. The second is a tragic national problem, because if confidence in our leadership is destroyed, that is not a partisan problem. That goes to the heart of the issues we face with the whole younger generation. And with confidence destroyed, every political issue turns into a test of strength.
Gewechselt, doch darunter tragen sie ein Erkennungszeichen, die